Judge me if you want, but answer one question first. How long should a wife wait for two grown men to stop acting like wounded college boys? I was the only person brave enough to put their past in one room and force them to face it. So I gave my ex the microphone at my first anniversary and let him turn old stories about my husband into jokes. Elliot watched us with that small, closed-mouth smile he used whenever he lacked the courage to answer. By the end of the toast, I was certain I would finally repair what both men were too proud to touch. At 33, I was Valentina Romano, a senior brand experience producer, and I knew how to turn tension into something people could survive. Of course, the practical one called that control whenever he did not want to admit that I was braver than he was. I counted reactions when I became uneasy. 1 silence, 2 lowered eyes, 3 people waiting. And our anniversary was no different. I gave my ex a microphone because laughter seemed cleaner than 12 years of resentment. My husband only gave me that small, closed-mouth smile he used when he had nothing useful to say. By dessert, I was certain both men would thank me. 3 weeks before the party, the cobalt blue microphone rested inside an open case on my studio table. Camille, my closest co-worker, listened while I explained the evening. First came dinner, then our anniversary slideshow. After that, one surprise guest would share college stories. Camille understood before I said Malik's name. She asked whether inviting my ex was brave or dangerous. I told her it was professional instinct. People could not heal what everyone kept pretending did not exist. Malik had once been Elliot's closest friend. In college, they shared a dorm room and behaved like brothers until both fell in love with me. Malik acted first and made every room feel alive. Elliot waited and remembered details other people missed. I chose Malik. That choice ended their friendship. Their last argument happened outside a student event, where campus staff separated them after years of resentment became shouting. Malik and I stayed together for almost 3 years. He made good days feel important, but he also made me work for every piece of attention. When he left me for another woman, there was no long talk. He moved cities and replaced me before I understood that we were over. I went to Elliot because he had always been safe. At first, I called it trust. Later, I called it love. We spent 5 years building something steady before we married. Every Sunday, we visited the same used record shop and listened to one album without touching our phones. Before my biggest work events, Elliot waited outside with coffee and a list of problems he had solved. That was how the practical one loved me. He handled details, but rarely told me what happened inside him. After our wedding, I asked why he had chosen me. He answered with facts about our values and the life we had built. He meant devotion. I heard calculation. My father had spoken that way when he left my mother and treated another girl like the daughter he preferred. Since then, private love had never felt complete. I needed to be chosen where people could see it. Elliot entered the studio carrying 2 coffees while Camille and I sorted college photographs. One picture showed Malik with his arm around my waist while Elliot stood half a step behind us. Elliot asked why it was on my table. I explained that our anniversary should include the full history. His eyes moved from the picture to the blue microphone. Then came that small, closed-mouth smile. I read it exactly as I always did: retreat, discomfort, surrender. He asked whether I planned to turn our anniversary into a college reunion. I told him I planned to prove that all 3 of us had grown. He asked what part Malik would play. I said the details were not final, though Camille and I had agreed on the speech. Elliot placed the coffees beside the microphone and reminded me that he had trusted me with the anniversary program. I told him trust meant allowing me to do what I did best. He looked at the photograph once more and left without another question. Camille waited until the door closed, then said the room had become colder. I dismissed that. Of course, Elliot was uncomfortable. Growth was uncomfortable. I closed the box, opened my phone, and searched for Malik's name. My plan was simple: invite the past, give it a microphone, and make it apologize. Malik answered 12 minutes after I sent the message. I counted because I had promised myself I would not stare at the screen. His first reply asked whether Elliot knew I was contacting him. Then he said marriage had probably erased his name from our conversations. I told him the anniversary was not about us. It was about ending a conflict that had lasted too long. Malik replied that Elliot had always needed someone else to arrange his courage. I laughed because the line sounded exactly like college. He still knew how to reach the part of me that felt unseen beside the practical one. He asked whether I still touched my necklace when I was trying to look calm. My fingers were already there. Over the next week, our messages became regular. Malik sent old photographs and stories about the man I had married. Some were harmless. Others carried that sharp edge he called honesty. He remembered Elliot changing shirts before a student dinner because I would be there. He remembered Elliot asking him not to date me until both men had spoken openly. Malak called it a request from someone who knew he would lose. I told him he was unfair, then added that Elliot had never been confident around him. That was how the line moved, through small replies that ended closer to something I did not want to name. Malik asked whether marriage had made Elliot more exciting. I said it had made him more reliable. He understood the insult inside the compliment. Soon, I was telling him that Elliot loved through lists and repairs. Some nights, I said, I felt like a project completed correctly. Camille helped me shape the surprise at a riverside cafe. She suggested harmless stories before Malik's apology. When she asked how often we were speaking, I said it was only event preparation. Of course, the event was why the conversation had started. Camille said nobody repaired a difficult room better than I did. My first direct lie came 2 nights later. Elliot and I were checking the guest list when my phone lit beside my plate. I had changed Malik's name to MB Studio. Elliot asked whether Malik had contacted me. I said he had only sent college photographs and that there had been no real conversation outside the anniversary. Elliot gave me the same closed-mouth smile. Then he asked whether Malik still saved complete message threads. He explained that Malik had always kept conversations because he believed context belonged to the person who preserved it. I dismissed that as another useless detail men remembered about former friends. Elliot then reminded me that I had told Camille about his failed college presentation and laughed when she repeated it in front of co-workers. He said he had already asked me not to turn his embarrassment into material. I told him stories created connection, and not every uncomfortable memory was disrespect. He asked whether I understood the difference between sharing my past and using someone else's pain to make a room like me. I told him his real problem was that he could not control how people saw him. His smile disappeared for 1 second. I counted the names on the list. 38 confirmed. 4 waiting. 2 children. The next morning, Malik mentioned that his studio had moved back to the city. At dinner, Elliot casually asked whether Malik still worked beside the train bridge. I asked how he knew. He said Naomi had seen the studio name on an exhibition listing. That explanation made sense. At Sunday brunch, Naomi asked about the anniversary schedule, and I mentioned a surprise guest from college. Her fork stopped before I said Malik's name. She asked whether Elliot had agreed. I said he had trusted me with the program. Elliot said he had not seen the final guest list. Naomi told me a surprise was generous only when the person receiving it would have chosen it. I answered that avoidance had protected nothing for 12 years. Later, Elliot asked whether Malik had already been invited. I said I had not made the final decision. The invitation had been accepted that morning. Malik had promised a complete version of the college story. I believed he meant a speech. My next step was simple. Keep Elliot calm until the anniversary, let Malik apologize in public, and prove that my secrecy had served something larger than honesty. The rain started 20 minutes before the guests arrived, tapping against the glass roof of our atrium. Orange peel hung in the air, and the cobalt blue microphone waited beside the projection screen. 39 guests came. I counted coats while Camille checked the place cards. Elliot wore the dark suit I had chosen and moved through the room helping his aunt. The practical one looked calm enough that I decided the difficult part had passed. I had told him about Malik that afternoon. He asked how long I had planned the surprise and how long I had been speaking to him. I said a few weeks and only as long as necessary. His closed-mouth smile appeared in the mirror. He asked whether I had considered that he might not want his first anniversary turned into the final chapter of a college conflict. I answered that the anniversary belonged to both of us and that I could not celebrate our future while he carried the past like a private injury. After a long breath, he said he would listen. Of course, I treated that as permission. Malik arrived last without a gift. He embraced me for 2 seconds longer than necessary. I counted only because Naomi was watching. Then he offered Elliot his hand. Elliot accepted it, and neither man moved closer. Before dinner, Elliot asked Jonah, the audio technician, not to mute the microphone and to keep the screen active until the final toast. I assumed Elliot feared a technical mistake would embarrass him. When dinner ended, I lifted the blue microphone and spoke about marriage being more than the clean memories people placed in frames. Then I introduced the man who had once known my husband better than anyone. The applause began weakly, so I smiled until it grew louder. Malik took the microphone and began with a story about Elliot arriving at college with labels still attached to 2 shirts. People laughed. Then he described Elliot preparing 40 note cards for a short presentation and entering the wrong classroom. I laughed too. Those stories made him human. Next, Malik showed the old film festival photograph. He reminded everyone that Elliot had spent the evening trying to ask me to dance but waited until the final song. Malik had asked first. He said waiting had always been Elliot's greatest talent because another man usually made the decision before he did. The laughter sharpened. Priyashad did not smile. Malik continued. He described Elliot asking him not to date me until both men had spoken honestly. Malik presented it as a request from someone who knew he would lose. Then he said patient men sometimes received the woman who returned after the exciting choice became too difficult. The room shifted. Naomi placed both hands flat on the table. I called out that Elliot's patience had finally paid off. The guests laughed again because I had given them permission. Malik stepped closer to Elliot and called him the safest man in every room. He said marrying me had been Elliot's reward for remaining available. I added that reliability had value too. Camille no longer laughed. She stood near the cocktail station holding a glass she had not touched. Malik then said Elliot had accused him of treating me like a prize, even though Elliot had spent years waiting to receive the same prize. A few guests stared at their plates. I laughed because silence would have made the joke look cruel. Then I saw my husband's face. The smile was gone. He was not embarrassed. He looked still, cold. He watched me instead of Malik. My laugh stopped halfway through a breath. I counted what stood between us. 2 bottles, 1 candle, 3 plates, and the blue microphone. I asked whether he was all right. He said I should let Malik finish. I reminded him that the speech would end with an apology. Elliot asked whether I was certain I knew how it would end. I heard insecurity, nothing more. I told him not to ruin a possible reconciliation because the jokes were uncomfortable. He looked toward Jonah and calmly repeated that the microphone should stay live and the screen should remain on. I read it as surrender. I returned to the screen and announced that dessert would be followed by Malik's real reason for coming. Malik smiled and said the final part included memories only the 3 of us understood. Interest moved through the room again. I called for dessert, certain the apology would return the evening to me. Elliot asked me to meet him in the upstairs library before dessert. The room smelled of old paper and cedar polish, and the college box sat open on his desk because I had used several photographs for the slideshow. He held the film festival picture between 2 fingers. In it, Malik had one arm around my waist while Elliot stood behind us, half a step away. Elliot asked why I had opened the box after promising that its contents would remain private. I reminded him that he had trusted me to create the anniversary presentation. He said he had trusted me with our memories, not given me permission to hand his worst years back to Malik. I told him Malik had already lived through those years, so nothing in the box was new to him. Elliot lowered the photograph and looked at me with a tired expression I had rarely seen. He said that when I came back after Malik left, he believed I had chosen him in a place where nobody was watching. He thought that mattered because it was different from the competition that had destroyed their friendship. His voice did not shake. He was not performing for me. Still, the practical one had spent years making silence sound like a punishment, so I heard the sadness as another attempt to make me responsible for everything he refused to say. I told him he was turning one difficult speech into proof that everyone had betrayed him. He asked whether I had been discussing our marriage with Malik. I said Malik had asked ordinary questions. Elliot asked whether I had compared the two of them. I answered that every married person compared the present to the past, even if they were too polite to admit it. His closed-mouth smile returned. He said I always believed that refusing a direct answer protected me from the meaning of it. I changed my approach. I touched his arm and told him Malik would finish with an apology, then leave. The cruel part was over. Elliot moved away from my hand. He said the problem was not only Malik's speech. The problem was that I had invited the speech into our home, placed it inside our first anniversary, and laughed when it became cruel. I told him public tension needed release. He answered that I was using professional words because personal words would require me to name my choice. 1 sentence. 2 seconds of silence. 3 slow breaths. I counted them because I needed the conversation to return to something manageable. A knock came at the door and Naomi entered without waiting. She looked at Elliot first, then asked me to end the speech and tell Malik to leave. I said the evening remained under control. Naomi answered that control had ended when I used her brother's private past as entertainment. I accused her of protecting him from every hard conversation, which was why he never learnt to defend himself. Naomi did not deny his flaw. She said Elliot's silence had hurt people, including me, but his weakness did not give me permission to punish him publicly. Of course, she was his sister. Her judgment had never been neutral. Then she told Elliot that Priya was waiting downstairs. I asked why Priya had been invited. Elliot said she belonged to the college history I had chosen to make public. That answer did not fit the passive man I believed I understood. For one quiet breath, several details came together. Elliot knew Malik had returned to the city, remembered that he saved complete conversations, and had told Jonah to keep the microphone live. A narrow possibility opened. Then I closed it. Malik's pride would never allow him to work with Elliot in secret. The practical one had simply contacted old classmates because that was what he did. He prepared. We went downstairs through the narrow gallery. Priya stood beside the projection table holding a black archive folder. Jonah was connecting Malik's phone to the screen, and a device name appeared for a moment, MBEG Archive. I asked what it meant. Jonah said Malik's device had already been paired with a shared folder prepared for the presentation. I assumed EG meant Elliot Grant because the files were about him. Priya closed the folder when she saw me. She confirmed that Elliot had invited her after learning the college history would be discussed in public. She wanted to make sure memory did not become another weapon. I told her the speech was only a roast. Priya said a roast required consent from the person being roasted. I answered that Elliot had agreed to listen. She said agreement given after a surprise was not the same as consent given before it. Near the front door, Camille stood with her coat over one arm. I asked why she was leaving before the final toast. She said she needed air and might return. Her answers had become shorter, slower. I told her the hardest part was already finished. Camille looked past me toward Malik, who was scrolling through our messages beside Jonah, and asked whether I knew exactly what he planned to show. I said I knew the emotional direction, which was enough. She nodded without smiling and stepped into the hall. Malik approached and asked whether he should continue after dessert. I told him stopping now would make the humiliation meaningless. He asked whether I still wanted the complete version. I said yes. He touched the cobalt blue microphone and warned that the complete version would protect nobody. I thought he meant Elliot. Behind him, the screen returned to the old photograph, with my husband still standing half a step away. Something inside the house had cracked, but the final toast could still make it look planned. Dessert arrived at 9:20, 12 minutes later than the schedule I had approved. I checked the printed program twice because small delays could turn a controlled evening into a confused one. The guests returned to their seats, but the room no longer belonged to the celebration. Conversations stopped when Elliot moved. Several people watched him instead of the screen. The practical one sat beside Naomi with his hands folded, wearing the same closed-mouth smile he used whenever he had decided that silence made him superior. I approached before taking the microphone from Malik. Elliot asked me one final time to end the program. His request was quiet and specific. He wanted me to tell the guests that the roast had gone too far, ask Malik to leave, and finish our anniversary after the house was empty. He said we could discuss the messages, the photographs, and my secrecy in private. For once, he was not simply walking away from the conversation. He was giving me a choice. The timing made the offer feel dishonest. If I stopped then, everyone would remember Malik humiliating him and me failing to control the result. The apology was the only thing that could turn the discomfort into something useful. I told Elliot that he had spent 6 years using silence as a wall and expecting me to call it maturity. Whenever I asked what he felt, he repaired something, checked a bill, or left the room until I became tired of asking. He treated practical care like a complete marriage and then judged me for wanting words. That part was true. He did not argue. His eyes lowered toward the table, and the smile disappeared. He admitted that he withdrew when he was hurt. He said he had believed staying calm kept him from becoming cruel, but it had also made me feel alone beside him. Then he repeated the offer. Stop the program. Ask Malik to leave. Choose the marriage before the audience became more important than the two people inside it. I heard a man asking me to protect him from a truth he could not survive in public. Of course, that was how the practical one worked. He wanted every difficult emotion reduced to a private task he could manage without witnesses. I told him I would not spend another year hiding uncomfortable facts to preserve his pride. If he wanted respect, he needed to survive one honest evening without asking his wife to rescue him. My voice carried farther than I intended. Naomi heard. Priya heard. 3 guests at the nearest table turned their heads. Elliot became still. I had crossed the line deliberately, and I knew they were listening. That made the sentence feel stronger. He said I should finish the program exactly as I had planned. Afterward, he would handle everything properly. No anger, no raised voice. Then came the closed-mouth smile. Small, calm, final. I read it as acceptance. He had stopped fighting because he understood that I was right. I walked back toward the projection screen with more confidence than I had felt all evening. Elliot became quieter as I became louder, but that only proved how completely I had taken control. I sent Camille a message asking her to tell me I had not done anything wrong. 1 minute passed, then 2. The message showed as read, but no answer appeared. I placed my phone face down beside the blue microphone. Camille had always become nervous when a plan reached its most difficult point. She would calm down once the apology landed. Malik stood near Jonah with his phone unlocked. I handed him the microphone and told the guests that reconciliation required full honesty. I said Elliot and Malik had spent 12 years protecting their own versions of the past, and I would no longer allow either man to edit what had happened. Malik asked whether I wanted him to tell the complete story. I said yes. He looked toward Elliot. My husband gave one small nod. I assumed he was finally permitting Malik to admit his mistakes. Malik began by saying their friendship had not ended only because they wanted the same woman. It had ended because neither man trusted the other to tell the full truth. Elliot believed Malik had used me to defeat him. Malik believed Elliot had waited near our relationship, hoping to collect what remained after it failed. I interrupted lightly and said both men had probably been partly right. Nobody laughed. Malik said the pattern had continued long after college. I thought he was preparing the apology. I stood beside the screen with my champagne glass raised, ready to deliver the final toast I had rehearsed for 2 weeks. The room would understand my plan. Malik would apologize. Elliot would accept. The guests would applaud because people always preferred resolution when someone placed it clearly in front of them. Then Malik unlocked his phone. The slideshow disappeared. A white message window filled the screen, and my initials appeared at the top. I told Jonah he had opened the wrong file. Elliot said the screen should remain exactly where it was. Malik explained that no honest apology could begin with another edited story. I stepped closer to the projector and told everyone the messages were only part of the event planning. Private words often looked worse when stripped of tone, and I knew how quickly an audience could misunderstand them. I raised my glass and promised that the full context would prove why I had been right to bring them together. Elliot sat without moving. Malik scrolled to the beginning of our conversation. I was still certain that once he reached the end, the room would finally see what I had built. The first message on the screen said Elliot was kind, but beside Malik, he had always looked like a boy. The next said marriage had not made him more confident, only busier. Malik read each line slowly. Then he reached the message where I had written that some nights I wondered whether I had married the man I loved or the man I knew would never leave. My fingers tightened around the champagne glass. A crack crossed it, and cold liquid ran over my hand. Nobody came closer. Elliot stood and gave me that same closed-mouth smile. For the first time, it did not look like surrender. He explained that Malik had contacted him after my third private message. Malik wanted proof that he could still enter Elliot's life whenever he chose. Elliot agreed to one condition. If I kept writing by choice, Malik would save the full thread. If I invited him into our home, he would come. If I handed him the microphone, he would tell the complete story. The details I had dismissed returned at once. Elliot had asked whether Malik saved conversations. He knew the studio address. He kept the microphone live. The MBEG archive was a shared record between Malik Brooks and Elliot Grant. Priya had come because she witnessed the first collapse and refused to let either man rewrite it. Elliot had even offered me one last private exit before dessert. I had refused it in front of everyone. I said the two men had trapped me. Priya answered that nobody forced me to contact Malik, compare them, hide the messages, invite my ex, use Elliot's photographs, or demand the complete version. Her calm words left me nowhere to place my excuse. I turned to Malik and asked him to explain that our messages were emotional, not romantic. He placed the cobalt blue microphone on the table and said he had never promised to take me back. He only wanted to know whether he could still pull me toward him and whether Elliot would still react. He had received both answers. I asked whether he had used me only to punish Elliot. Malik said his reasons had never been clean, then walked toward the door. Elliot stopped him long enough to say their friendship was not repaired. Malik had exposed me, but he had also enjoyed the roast. He left alone. I looked for Camille. Her chair was empty, her coat was gone, and my message still showed as read. Elliot stood beside the dark screen and said he had spent years blaming Malik, because blaming one man was easier than admitting all three of us had treated love like a contest. He admitted his silence had damaged our marriage. He had loved through tasks because tasks could not reject him. But his silence created an empty space, and I filled it with an audience. He said I had not returned because I finally saw him. I returned because he seemed unable to do what Malik had done and leave. Then he thanked me for the anniversary gift. I had not brought his old friend back. I had shown him that he had married the reason the friendship never healed. I told him we could discuss everything after the guests left. He said privacy had been available before I turned our anniversary into a public test. Then he told me to leave with enough clothes for several days. The townhouse had belonged to him before our marriage, and Naomi would stay while I packed. The next morning, his petition for dissolution and notice seeking exclusive possession arrived with a property exchange date. I moved into a furnished apartment with a refrigerator that clicked every 14 minutes. Our shared event account was divided, and Elliot removed himself from my optional work expenses. Naomi, Priya, and most of the college circle stopped answering me, while Camille limited contact to scheduled messages. Malik blocked my number after returning my photographs. A client moved her winter campaign to another producer because she no longer trusted me with private stories. I still believe Elliot's silence helped damage our marriage. He made distance look like patience and expected practical care to speak every sentence he refused to say. That remains true. But I believed my power came from making two men compete where everyone could see them. I wanted proof that I could not be replaced. Instead, I gave one man the room, the other man the evidence, and both of them a reason to stop choosing me. The cobalt blue microphone remained on the anniversary table after every guest had gone. Nobody ever asked me to finish the toast.